Okay, good evening everybody. I think we'll make a start. I'd like to welcome Peter Weston, who's come to talk to us tonight on a fascinating subject. I was just saying, when I heard the topic, I Googled, a very lazy way of doing it, but I Googled Allan Lewis, and it's fascinating to read a bit about him. Just very quickly, Peter's had a long-standing interest in Allan Lewis. Goes back, I think I'm right, about 25 years, and you live near where he was brought up.
Yep.
Is that correct? Peter was just explaining there's a statue in the old market area of Hereford. My ignorance is I don't know exactly where that is, but Peter was just explaining that there's a statue that he and others helped to erect, and that's a statue to Allan. I don't know if anybody in this room's seen it, but yeah. Well, that's good. So next time we go to Hereford, I'm going to see if I can see it. And Peter was also saying he had a role with the National Trust to do, based at Croft Castle a few years ago, to do with war memorabilia. So he's got a very rich history there. So I'm going to shut up. Can I ask you to welcome Peter, and looking forward to hearing his talk. Thanks, Peter.
Thank you for asking me to come along. This is in fact my second visit to here. I did a talk probably 7 or 8 years ago about local men who were in the Herefordshire regiment, found themselves transferred to the border regiment and fought in the Battle of the Somme. So, as you've just pointed out, I've got a lifelong history and interest in World War I, World War II, all military history. But around about 30 years ago, I became aware of this gentleman, Allan Leonard Lewis, because 30 years ago, I lived in a small village just a few miles outside Hay-on-Wye called Wintherton. And just by chance, I happened to be walking in the churchyard of a church a little bit further down the way and saw this plaque dedicated to this man. And I thought, well, I wonder how he won the VC. What's his story? So that's where my interest in Allan Leonard Lewis started. But first of all, what I want to say is that since 1856, when the VC was first given, there have been 1,358 VCs awarded, but only one has ever been awarded to a native Hereford-born man. That being Allan Leonard Lewis. I think that's quite something when you think about the county and the regiments that border the county, the Worcestershire Regiment, the Gloucestershire Regiment, Warwickshire, all these counties that border Herefordshire. I find it quite amazing that in all that time there's only been one given out to a Herefordshire-born man. There are 2 others that are associated with the county, but they were not native-born Herefordshire men. So, who is Allan? What's his story? My talk tonight is going to be basically in 3 parts. There'll be the story of Allan and how he goes on to win the VC. And then as I was a member of a group that managed to raise some money to erect a statue in his memory, that's the second part. And then it's gone on there from that for me, because I've become kind of slightly obsessed in trying to find his body, because his body was lost at the end of the war, and I'm trying to locate it, but I'll tell you more about that as we go on. So let's have a look at the next slide. So this is where Allan was born. He was born at Witney-on-Wye, just outside Hay-on-Wye, and he was born on the 28th of February 1895. His father George was a carpenter on the Witney estate, and they had this rather grand villa as part of the job, and that's where Allan was born. But then as a young child they moved to Wyside Cottage, and that's literally where he grew up, by the side of the River Wye, and that cottage is still there, and it's a kind of like holiday let now. So Allan's the one here with the fishing rod. He was a typical young country boy. He enjoyed fishing, shooting, all these kind of outdoor pursuits. And there you can see him with his younger brother, Frank. Now, some 30 years ago, Frank was still alive, and I'm told he was quite a character. And the local game warden said to me, "Do you know what?" He said, if you buy him a pint, he'll let you see his brother's VC, because he's still got it. But sadly, before I got a chance to go and meet him, he'd passed away, and the VC went to another member of the family. Now, when Allan was 16, he moved away from Herefordshire and he moved to Neath, because he'd started off in agriculture, but he was always interested in mechanical things, and cars and trucks, buses and things like that were all up and coming things at that time, and he wanted to be involved with it. So he got himself a job with the Great Western Railway, not as a train driver, but on a bus service. And he was eventually promoted and gained promotion to becoming a driver from being a conductor. And here we can see Allan in 1914, looking quite smart in his GWR uniform. He worked, as I said, on this as a driver, but he was also quite good mechanically, and he could repair things and fix things. So when the war breaks out, Allan decides he wants to do his little bit. He wants to join the military. And certainly they were looking for people like Allan, people who'd got knowledge, who'd got skills that they could use. He could drive, he could fix things. And so originally he joined the Royal Army's Service Corps, and off he goes to France. Now, unfortunately for Allan, he failed to tell the Great Western Railway that he was leaving and joining the army, and they took quite a dislike to this. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about that later as we go. Now, early in 1918, he returns back to the UK, is repatriated, suffering from jaundice. He'd not been wounded, but he was suffering from jaundice. And he finds himself in the Red Cross Hospital at Longleat, the home of Lord and Lady Bath in the county of Wiltshire. Now, they had a daughter called Lady Kathleen, who she was a nurse and helped out at the sort of hospital part. And apparently she took quite an interest in Allan, so much so that Lord Bath thought, "It's about time that you went back to the front line, I think, young man. You know, we need to move you on." So once he'd recovered, he found himself transferred to number 8 platoon of the 6th Battalion of the Northamptonshire Regiment, and he returned to France. Now, what we've got to understand is that at this time in 1918, Britain was really on its uppers. Germany had delivered a crushing blow, and we almost lost the war at that point. Things were going really badly. So although he was a driver, although he was a mechanic of sorts, he found himself in the infantry, fighting on the front line with the Northamptonshire Regiment. So late in 1916, early 1917, the German army actually retreated and constructed this Hindenburg line, and it was really strong defensive positions. It shortened the front line, and they built it in such a way that it was almost impenetrable. So here we can see in 1917 the kind of German construction. So you've got front line, second lines, and it goes on and on. It's almost impossible to break through. And they thought that that was it. They was going to be there. Nobody would ever be able to break through. And on the 21st of March 1918, we get what's called the Kaiser's Offensive. And Germany launches one last-ditched effort to try to win the war before the Americans can sort of come in and bring their troops and all their equipment and things to bear. And initially, the Germans do a fantastic job. The stormtroopers smash through the British lines. They retake all the land that's been captured and they force us to retreat. And we get to a point where we almost collapse. And then on the 10th of August, you get what's known as the 100-day offensive. And it's almost as though the Germans have run out of steam. They've exhausted their lines, they've run out of stores, and it starts to all go badly. And we start to go the other way. The British and the Allies start to force the Germans back. And they start taking hundreds of German prisoners. And on the 18th of September 1918, along with other British units, the 6th Northamptonshire Regiment attacked the village of Ronsoy, which forms part of this German Hindenburg line. So they know that they've got a tremendous job trying to break through this line. So this is a report by Allan Leonard Lewis's commanding officer. On the morning of the 18th of September 1918, this non-commissioned officer was in charge of a section which he had successfully kept together. He was on the right of the line, and as the battalion started to attack Ronsoy, where east and west barrage opened, the battalion advanced to a point where the enemy machine gun fire was so intense it was practically impossible to get forward. The barrage went on and the battalion was temporarily held up. This man, working with his section on the right amongst the ruins, observed 2 enemy machine guns opposite him, enfilading the whole battalion. He crawled forward single-handed on his own initiative with bombs. Now, when they talk about bombs, they're talking about what we term today as hand grenades. So he got within bombing range and successfully bombed the teams manning the enemy guns. The enemy left their guns and ran out of their emplacements. Lance Corporal Lewis thereupon used his rifle with great effect and the whole team surrendered. He had wounded 6 and captured 4 unwounded of the enemy. By his courage and determination in putting out of action 2 enemy machine guns, he undoubtedly enabled the battalion to advance and so contributed largely to the success which followed. Now, it's quite amazing to think that this young lad from Herefordshire, young farmer, that's gone on to join the army as a driver, suddenly finds himself in a position where he's got to do something. He can see that the whole line is held up by these German machine guns, and he decides on his own initiative he's going to crawl out into no man's land and attack these 2 German machine gun posts. Quite a brave thing. And he successfully managed to knock the 2 guns out of action, not only capturing the guns, but capturing several German prisoners as well. So this is Colonel Turner, who's his commanding officer. You can see he looks quite a cheery guy. And your little picture here of some of the colleagues of his in the 6th Northamptonshire Regiment. So this was the citation for his Victoria Cross, which would have been published in the papers and things of the day. For conspicuous bravery at Ronsoy on September the 18th, 1918, when in command of a section on the right of the attacking line, which was held up by intense machine gun fire. Lance Corporal Lewis, seeing that 2 enemy machine guns were enfilading the line, crawled forward single-handed and successfully bombed the guns, and by rifle fire later caused the whole team to surrender, thereby enabling the whole line to advance. On September the 21st, so just 3 days later, he again displayed great powers of command, and having rushed his company through the enemy barrage, was killed whilst trying to get his men under cover from heavy machine gun fire. Throughout, he showed a splendid disregard of danger, and his leadership at a critical period was beyond praise. Now, it's incredible to think that just 3 days after doing this act for which he would win the VC, he tries to do a similar thing again and was killed. So he never knew that he would even be recommended for the VC. Sadly, Allan never sort of knew that he was going to get any recognition whatsoever. But I think it gives us a taste of the kind of man that he was. He certainly was somebody who wanted to do the best that he could and to do the best for the company of men that he was leading. So this is what the king at the time had to say, because Allan's parents went to Buckingham Palace to collect the Victoria Cross on his behalf posthumously from George V. It is a matter of sincere regret to me that the death of Lance Corporal Allan Leonard Lewis, 6th Battalion Northamptonshire Regiment, deprived me of the pride of personally conferring upon him the Victoria Cross, the greatest of all rewards for valour and devotion to duty. So back in 2017, I had the honour of meeting this lady in the centre here, and she's called Dawn Lewis, and she's the great niece of Allan Leonard Lewis, and she spent most of her life listening to stories passed down through the family about Allan and what he did and how he won the VC in World War I. And she decided that she wanted to do something about it. She thought maybe it's time that Allan got some recognition. And she formed a group called the Allan Leonard Lewis VC Memorial Fund. And we set off in 2018 with an aim of raising £36,000 in order to fund a statue. Now, anybody who's ever had anything to do with trying to raise money, I'm sure will appreciate what a difficult and terrible task that can be. And we'd only got a very small timeline in which to do it, just over a year. £36,000 doesn't sound a lot when you say it, but when you stand there with a bucket all day outside a football ground and you're hoping that people are going to chuck an odd pound in, 50 pence, and you spent a day, and at the end of it you go, do you know what, we've raised 40 quid. You start to realise just how difficult it's going to be. Not only have you got the problem of trying to raise money, you've got to try and find somewhere where you can put that statue. Then you've got to try and find all kinds of things, planning consent. There's all sorts of restraints that are put upon you. But nevertheless, we set off with this goal of trying to raise £36,000. How did we manage to do it then? So we chose an artist, and the name of the artist is Gemma Pearson. And if you've been into the grounds of the cathedral in Hereford, some of you might have seen the statue to Elgar, yeah, the bicycle. She's the same artist who did that. We started raising the money. We were gifted the land, which is the old market. They gave us a little piece of land and said, you can put your statue here if you want to. We got planning permission, and we set off with a deadline for the 21st of September 2018, that being the 100th anniversary of Allan's death. And that's when his statue was in fact unveiled. So how did we raise the money? Well, I stood on the toll bridge at Hay-on-Wye, dressed as a World War I soldier, along with 3 or 4 other people. That was one initiative we did, and we raised money by doing things like that. We did various reenacting events. We got lots of kinds of gifts and donations. We were given one of the poppies from the Tower of London, which we got framed, and we raffled that off, and that brought in well over £1,000. We had generous amounts of money given by the George Cross Society. We had dinner dancers. We even got a brewery, a local brewery, to brew a beer called Heroes Ale. And that was brewed to a faithful World War I recipe. And the deal was, well, every barrel that goes will give you 10 quid, and every bottle of beer that goes will give you 10 pence or something like that from every bottle. That nearly caused me a problem and made me an alcoholic, but I'm still here, so I managed to survive that. So we started raising this money, and I thought, you know what, we're doing okay, we're doing all right. And then the builders came along and said, was you aware that it was another £15,000 for the foundations? And we're like, what? Because what you see above is mirrored more or less below. If it's 6 feet high, it's 6 feet below. We need another 15 grand for that. And this whole £36,000 started to spiral, so much so that the end bill ends up at almost double, around £60,000. And I thought that as far as 6 weeks from actually achieving it, I thought we're just not going to do it. We're never going to do it. And we're desperate to raise this money. But all of a sudden, it's just money started to come in from all over. People started giving us checks and things. It was amazing how it happened. And we managed to get the money to do it. So that was one of the better days we had, fundraising. Bit of Morris dancing, that raised a few pounds. Again, as I said, we did World War I reenacting. And this is the drawing, or the working drawing, that was done for the statue of Allan. And one of the things that the group wanted was, they didn't want something that was going to be glorified, somebody with a rifle and a bayonet and running around. They wanted something that really summed up the character of Allan. And so we went for, what we wanted was a simple salute to a soldier, but not just Allan. We wanted it to be something to commemorate what everybody had done in that terrible war of 1914-18. So that was the working drawing, which Gemma put together. And we chose that and said, yep, that's okay, we'll go ahead with that. Now, I wasn't fortunate enough to go on this particular day, but my wife was. And so this is how it's been explained to me. They make basically a clay model, and then from that model, they manage to cast bronze body parts, which are then put together to form the statue. So it all starts off with a very small figure, very small statue, and then this pantograph device sort of scales it up, and you get the big working model. And there you can see Dawn, his Alan's great niece, sort of admiring the statue that's going to be eventually made into the bronze statue that we've got. Various pictures of it as it goes. So now we get to the foundry day. So this is the day when they actually cast it in the bronze. Here you can see them casting the statue. And there you've got the parts. You've got his head, his arm, his torso. And then as it's put out to sort of cool down, all the clay is broken off, and you can start to see the bronze beneath it. There you've got his head, part of his arm, and then that's all stitched together, kind of sort of like welded by some form together. And there it is, the finished article. So it's become a little bit of a tradition. If you look, the VC is quite bright and shiny, because somebody put a rumour around that if you went and sort of stroked his VC, you would have good luck. And it seems to have stuck. And it's one of these things, everybody that goes through town now, certainly we do anyway when we go and see it, we always go and say hello and rub the VC, and it's become quite shiny. So we thought, well, once we've done this, the council in its wisdom will take this on, and they'll be happy to have that. No, it's your statue, you're responsible for it. It's your job to maintain it. Not that it takes a lot of maintenance, but you might need to do something to stop verdigris coming on it or whatever. But you certainly got to insure it, because if somebody in a drunken stupor walks into it and stubs the toe or whatever, maybe they'll sue you. So we had to appoint trustees. Fortunately, I'm not one of the trustees, so I don't have any of them issues. But nevertheless, it's now become an annual thing that it's got to be insured, it's got to be cleaned and maintained, and the trustees have taken that task on. We had hoped that the council would have done it, but they haven't. So every year, what we do on the 21st, the group, we will go back and we lay a wreath and we remember Allan, we play the last post, and we hope that doing talks like this educate people and let people know about where he is, how he won it, and you know, you'll think it's not just a piece of bronze that stood there. So I mentioned that 3 days after he won the VC, he was killed in action. And although it's almost towards the end of the war, it's going to end in November, his body was found by Australian troops who wrote to his mother and said, we buried him, he's had a proper Christian burial, and they returned his paybook and letters and personal effects went back to his mother, but subsequently his body was lost. So the exact location of where he was buried was lost. And he's commemorated on this memorial at a place called Vis-Artois, and that's almost 40 miles away from where Allan was killed. And I started to think to myself, how can you lose him? You know, it's not like it happened in 1915 or 1916 and that area's been heavily shelled and bombarded. How can you have lost his body? We know that the Australians recovered it. We know that he was buried. Where's he gone? So I started to get really fascinated in this. And along with a good friend of mine who's more wiser than what I am at sort of doing this sort of thing, we managed to get all the burial records from where all the bodies are being collected from by the Imperial War Graves Commission, as it was, where they were buried, and we started to piece it together. And we've come to the kind of conclusion that he is possibly buried in a cemetery called Unicorn Cemetery, under a stone that will say an unknown soldier, or a soldier unknown to God, something like that. And we think we've worked it or narrowed it down to as little as 2. But you can't go starting digging people up. And, you know, the easy answer is, well, you could do DNA, couldn't you? But you couldn't sort of countenance, well, oh no, we got the wrong man. No, we'll have to leave it. So the Commonwealth War Graves, as it is today, would be quite happy if we could prove, yes, that is him. They would be quite happy to put on that stone that it is him and give him the kind of recognition that he should get. But until we can prove conclusively that that is that man who's beneath that stone, we're not going to be able to do that. And from what I understand, you only get one go at it. So we've got to make sure that we get it right before we put our case forward. So somewhere there is that magic piece of information, perhaps locked away in some Australian archive, just waiting to come up. And these things do, it's uncanny how it happens. Every now and again, you'll be looking for something else and you find the little piece of information that you're looking for. And we've got a lot of theories about how and why and where and when. We just need that one piece now to add to it. Hopefully that will come. But I can tell you some strange things, and I don't know whether you believe in it or not, whether you believe in divining. But there's a chap who sort of goes out on the battlefields, and he's one of these. If you say to him, I've got this pocket watch or whatever, it belonged to my great granddad, and he feels it and he says, oh, I'll go, and he goes round with his divining rods. We took him to this cemetery where we believe he is. We didn't say to him, well, we think he's on the 3rd row, second in from the back. We just said, we think is in this cemetery. He looked at a picture of him, and he went in with the divining rods, and he went to one of the two graves that we think it could be. Now that could just be, it's hocus pocus, don't believe in it. It's certainly not scientific. The Commonwealth War Graves would laugh at me if I went there and said I took a diviner. I'm sure they would. But it backs my sort of convictions and my thoughts. I'm thinking maybe there is something in this, possibly. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll manage to prove that that is indeed the grave of Allan and give him the recognition that he justly deserves. I'd love to see it. Who knows? So, as I say, we're trying to find him. Whether we will or not, I don't know. But he's out there somewhere. He's under a stone, something like that. A soldier of the Great War, as many thousands are. So, any questions about Allan Leonard Lewis? Anything that you, or how we went about raising the money, or?
Have you seen the VC from the member of the family who's got it?
No, I haven't, no. But it's locked away in a bank vault, but they've still got the medal. He would have also received 3 other medals and what they call a memorial plaque, which is a big sort of bronze disc. Now, apparently, the bronze disc and the 3 other medals was stolen in the 1960s from the cottage in which the family lived. But the VC had been kept separate, fortunately, so they've still got that.
The Pipsqueak and Wilfrid ones?
Yes, yeah, they were stolen, yeah.
How did you manage to find the photos of him as a child?
They came through from the family, from Dawn. She gave me a lot of information and a lot of useful information, accounts and letters and things that were written at the time. I also managed to do a lot of research through the Hereford Times and the sort of archives like that to find information about Allan.
As it was so near the end of the war,
Yeah.
those German soldiers, he probably saved their lives.
He probably did in a roundabout way, yeah. Yeah, most certainly,
I
yeah.
wonder if there's any record on the German side of that incident.
There may well be. Again, there are lots of sort of German archives which they tended to keep far better accounts and reports than what we did. But it's a very kind of intense and confusing point. At that time in 1918, as you're getting towards the end of the war, it's a very kind of like fluid, the line is moving backwards and forwards, everything's happening so quick. Once you start to get into 1919 and 1920, everybody is sick and tired of World War I. Nobody wants to hear any more about it. They've had 4 years of fighting. All they want to do is get people buried, get home and forget it and get on with their lives. And that is, sadly today, efforts would be made, wouldn't they, where you do DNA and you try to identify people. Back then, they were just dealing with literally thousands and thousands of corpses and just trying to do the best that they could with them.
What happened to Great Weston?
Right, yes, thank you for reminding me about that. So, the Great Western Railway, in their wisdom, when Allan left and didn't give them a week's notice, they took real umbrage to that. And they said, well, we've got a roll of honour and we're going to publish this book at the end of the war. All our employees who went and served the king and the country and died, but his name isn't going in it because he failed to give us notice. So he's a wrong one. So he's not going in. Now, the Great Western Railway still exists to this day in some sort of form. So as part of our appeal, we said to them, would you like to donate some money, and they said, no. I tell you what, though, we'll name a train after him. So we've now got a train that's called Allan Leonard Lewis. And the station at Neath has a a memorial and a plaque to him. So you can bet the GWR certainly want to know him now. They didn't then, but they do now. So yeah, thank you for reminding me about that. I'd forgot about that. Yeah. Yes.
I have a great uncle who died in the First World War, and my grandparents had letters which were written to his parents by members of his platoon
Yep.
and so on.
Yep.
Do Alan's family have that sort of information
Well,
about him at all?
Certainly I was privy to seeing a lot of letters. I didn't see any that were actually from, say, his officer or anybody connected with the military. But I am told, or Dawn did tell me, that back in the 1960s, when her grandparents had died, some family member threw a lot of things away and burnt a lot of things. So maybe something like that was lost. Fortunately, there are some bits that have survived, like the invitation from Buckingham Palace to go to receive the VC from the King. Things like that had survived, but a lot of things, I think, have sadly been lost. It's just, you're just hoping that something will come up. And it's amazing because there might be somebody sat in here now who in a few hours' time will go away and think, do you know what? I think I know something about that. Now, I did this talk a few months ago at Crednhill. And the day that the group got in touch with me to say, are you coming on the 21st? A lady from Crednhill who had done this talk months before rang me up and said, do you know, I only just realised that me and my late husband used to go drinking with his younger brother, Frank. And it was kind of, you know, I thought, this is a bit eerie. I've got Lentwardine saying, are you coming on the 21st? I've got this lady ringing me up saying, you did this talk for us a few months ago, and I've just realised that I actually knew his brother, and he used to talk to me about it. And it's strange how things come about. Last time I did a talk here, there was a gentleman sat here, and he came over and he said, oh, the officer you're talking about was my uncle. And he survived. He was a prisoner of war. He survived. He became a publican in Gloucestershire. And he gave me lots of photographs and information. Fantastic. It was brilliant. So doing these, sometimes it jerks something and somebody goes, I think there's a connection there. You never know what's going to come up. Somebody, somewhere, and I think it's going to come from the Australians, and we've got good friends in the Australian military. I did tell you about my friend who's better than I am at sort of locating the bodies and identifying people. He's had fantastic success, particularly with the Australians, who are very pro trying to do this. If there are something out there, if there are records out there, there's a good chance that that's where it'll come from. Certainly, it says in the letter, you know, that his family received, that this Australian had said he'd removed his paybook, photographs, personal effects, which he'd returned, and that they'd buried him. Now, he says that they buried him at a place called east of Lempire. Now, there was a cemetery called east of Lempire, but it was one of these tiny little ones that perhaps only contained 10, 15 bodies. And after the war, in the 1920s, the French farmers started saying, hang on a minute, that you've got my bit of field there, and then you've got another bit of land there that's got 5 in, and why don't you just collect them all up and put them in a great big cemetery? And that's what they did. They started forming what they called concentration cemeteries, and they moved them. And this is where I think his body got lost. I think at that time it was moved from East Lempire and ended up at Unicorn in a concentration cemetery. And his name or whatever, if there was a cross or whatever there was on it, on his mark in his grave, was lost. So somewhere it's just getting that little bit of information. And if we could get it, who knows, you know, hopefully we could get that stone named in his honour. Yeah.
Do you know anything more about the young lady who clearly had an attachment to Allan?
No.
Could he possibly have written letters to her?
That is a possibility. The Northamptonshire Regiment no longer exists, but Northampton University now hold all the archive of things to do with the regiment, things to do with the papers at the time. And I've written to them on several occasions and had no reply whatsoever from them. So sadly, I think it seems to be a way that we're going. The Commonwealth War Graves seem to have got a lot of interns and a lot of younger people who don't seem to have the same interest, and it's getting increasingly difficult to find things out from some of these bodies. So I've not had any luck anyway with the university, but yes, somewhere there could be letters like that.
Have you thought about generating some publicity? I mean, to give a TV programme or a radio programme to try and generate some more information?
I haven't gone any further with it, to be honest. We've left it as it is at the moment. As I said, we have got some irons in the fire with Australians, and we're hoping that, you know, that if there is anything more to come, that it would come from the Australian side of things. So there are people who are, I'm convinced what will happen is they'll be looking for, and you do it yourself, don't you? You think, I'm looking for something, and you go in a drawer and you think, I haven't seen that for ages. Exactly what I'm looking for. Somebody will be opening a file and they'll go, I know a guy who's interested in that. That might be exactly what he's after. I'm hoping that that's where it comes from. But we're going over there in July ourselves, aren't we? So, because I've not been to Unicorn Cemetery myself, so I've been to France. I've lost count of how many times I've been. But that's one particular cemetery I've not been to. But whether I'll go and get my divining rods out and see if I can find him or not, I don't know. But I'm quite interested in talking about anything to do with World War I. So if you've got any questions, go on. You were going to say, sir.
You might be interested to know that I knew nothing about the statue at all.
Right.
Some time ago, a couple of years I think, we were walking towards the centre of Hereford. I came across the statue. From a distance, I thought it was some guy standing there in front of this cafe.
Yeah.
And as I approached it, I was really impressed by the simplicity and dignity of the statue. It was beautifully made and very well sited, I thought.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Because when we had the planning applications, just like putting in for planning consent to build a house or whatever, we actually had complaints from people who said, oh no, we don't want it there, we want it near the big bull. That's where it should go. You don't want to put it there. Well, why don't you put it down by the railway station? Seeing as he worked for the railway, it should go down there. We had all kinds of issues. The market, or Old Market, is now owned by a company, and they were generous enough to donate that piece of land to us. Certainly the council couldn't offer us a site where to put it. It was just down to the generosity of the company that owns the Old Market that gave us that. So we were very lucky that we even found a spot to put him. And we'd only got that like 1 year timeline in which to do it. But raising that money, I'd never really thought about how difficult it was. And now when I see people and they've got all kinds of appeals and they're standing there with buckets, my heart goes out to them because I know just how difficult it is to try and raise money. And some people are very generous and some people would sooner chuck a button in than give you anything. But yeah, we did it. And I still don't know to this day how we managed to do it. It was incredible how it just seemed to all come together. Maybe it was forces above that were steering it. Who knows? Any other questions or?
Do you have any idea what proportion of the VCs were awarded
posthumously. Quite a lot. I don't know the exact figure, but I would think quite a lot. Yeah, maybe a third or so, something like that, possibly. I think it's quite amazing, as I said at the start, that for a county of this size, there's only one. You know, if you went to Gloucestershire, they've probably had dozens, or you went to Worcestershire and they'll have had lots. So I think, given that the county size, for only one, and given that the people that we've got, the regiment that we've got in Hereford now, we've only had this one VC. Quite amazing.
How many, do you know what proportion of the VCs that have been awarded were First World War, and what proportion since then? I
can't tell you offhand, but certainly there was quite a lot more in World War One than in World War Two, definitely. And you had big actions, certainly with Gallipoli. You have one that's called 6 VCs before breakfast, and it's when the Lancashire Fusiliers land in Gallipoli, and they modified a boat called the River Clyde, and they put ramps down it, and men literally ran down the ramps and into the sea. And as they made their way forward, they were machine gunned by Turkish machine gunners, and they were awarded 6 Victoria Crosses for that action. Now, there wasn't any one kind of individual that you could pick out and say, he deserved it, that one deserved it, and that was done as a form of a lottery. So everybody was deemed, everybody who took part in that was equally as brave and had equally added to that success of that particular operation. And that was done in the form of a lottery as to who got the VCs. But there's been numerous times when lots of VCs have been awarded. Rorke's Drift with the Zulus. I think there's 11 VCs given out at Rorke's Drift. So it's not uncommon for them to be in large numbers like that. And I think the last VC we had was Corporal Bahari in Afghanistan, is perhaps one of the more recent ones for the Victoria Cross. It's a very low number when you count in that in World War I, when you mentioned Pipsqueak and Wilfred, the general 3 medals, there's something like 6 million victory medals. You know, so when you think in terms of Victoria Crosses, are very, very, very rare. I've never seen Allan's. I would like to see it. Maybe one day the cousin in the family will get it out the vault and let me have a look. Who knows? Any other questions? Or
Do you have any stories about when he was truck driving earlier in the war?
No.
Was he an ambulance?
No, it's kind of very much unknown. He seems to have had, just what you would call an ordinary war. In between 1915 and 1918, when he comes home with jaundice, we know very little about what he did at that time. I don't think that he did anything to bring him to the attention of anybody or win any great admiration or awards. It seems that when he went back, he found himself in an infantry battalion, not as a sort of non-combatant driving, found himself in an infantry battalion. As I said, the war by then is starting to go really badly wrong for us, and we're having to pull out all the stops early 1918. People are being brought in who wouldn't have been normally used. We're really on our uppers. The Germans have captured thousands of frontline men, and it was everybody to the helm, really, to try to stem the German advance. But fortunately, same sort of thing happened in World War II when Germany invades Russia. They exhaust their supply lines, they run out of steam, in effect, they run out of ammunition, supplies, food, and they grind to a halt. And it's a bit like a rubber band. It's come to the end, and then woof, it flicks and goes back, and we started to push them back, which is where Allan finds himself going through. And then they've got to try and break through that Hindenburg line, which I'm sure the Germans thought was going to be totally impenetrable. There was no way you were supposed to get through that. So it was an amazing feat that they did manage to break through that Hindenburg line.
Are there any more questions for Allan? It's been fascinating. Thank you very much indeed. I mean, first of all, the courage of somebody like Allan Lewis, I mean, we can only begin to imagine. I mean, it's just amazing. And I think you all deserve a mention as well in terms of fundraising and erecting a statue. And now I've seen the photo, I know where it is, so
Right.
we'll go and have a look at it. So thank you very much indeed. Very grateful for your presentation, fascinating presentation. Can I ask you to give him a round of applause?